Hello, everyone. We're going to talk about aseptic technique today. This is the bedrock technique for all of microbiology. Um, if you do not know how to do aseptic technique, basically the rest of the semester is going to be quite difficult. It's incredibly important because it helps us to move over our bacterial samples without contaminating. So let's get started with what this is all about. So working aseptically is incredibly important to preventing contamination. And for our purposes in microbiology, it involves the Bunsen burner and autoclaves. These are tools that help us sterilize or incinerate what we're working on. So with the Bunsen burner, you often want to work within the flame zone. So not only does the fire itself incinerate the tools that we work with, like our loop, to keep it sterile, but it also creates an aseptic area, the flame zone. The way it works is that as the air touches the flame is so hot that it immediately sterilizes the air. Anything that passes through that flame is not going to survive. So as that warm air rises, it creates a convection current and comes back down and then gets sucked back up again by the heat. Now, there's non-sterile air all around it, and if it does happen to get sucked in, it's going to get sucked in through the bottom, then immediately come up, hit the flame, get sterilized, and then be passed out again. So you're creating this area where within 6 inches of the flame, all of the air surrounding that flame is sterile. So as long as you open your tip boxes, open your media containers, work with your loop within those 6 inches, you can be very certain that you are working aseptically, that you're not going to be contaminating your samples with anything that is in the air. We also, as I said, use the Bunsen burner to sterilize or incinerate our loops or our needles. We actually pass them through the flame and heat them up. Remember I mentioned we pass them through the tip of the cone inside the flame. There's kind of 2 portions to the flame, an inner cone and an outer cone, and the tip of that inner cone is where the flame is going to be the hottest. Now, when we say that we are transferring something aseptically, what we mean that we're doing is we're moving bacteria from one culture, one media source to another. And this has to be done aseptically. We don't want to risk anything in the air or anything on our loop contaminating either our original sample or the sample that we are transferring the bacteria onto. So when we do the lab, we're going to transfer bacteria from a broth, from a liquid media, onto a slant. We will also learn how to do it from a broth to another broth, from a slant to a deep, and from a slant to another slant. And we're also in a few classes going to learn how to move it onto a plate and how to do the 4-quadrant streaking on a plate. But for now, we're just going to work with the broths, the slants, and the deep. So the way that aseptic transfer of bacteria works, you're going to follow the same steps every time. The first thing you do after turning on your Bunsen burner is to grab your loop or your needle and you're going to flame it. That's what we call passing the needle through or the loop through the flame. Now you have a handle that's a different type of metal and it has a plastic part on the end for you to hold. That portion never becomes sterile. That part is always going to be considered contaminated. The part that gets sterile is the smaller wire that is twisted on itself to form the loop or the one single wire for the needle. That's the part that you pass through the tip of the cone on that inner flame until it glows red hot. So you want to move down the needle until every single part of it, or move down the loop until every single part of it becomes red hot. Once you've done that, you can pull it out of the flame and it is sterile. But you have to keep it within those 6 inches in that flame zone so that way you don't end up taking it out of that sterile area and something in the air contaminates it. You don't want to set it down or anything like that. So you have to learn how to work with this loop or this needle always in your hand. Then what you do is you grab your media. In this case, it'll be some kind of tube, either a broth or a slant. And you're going to uncap the tube, but we do this in a very special way. What we do is the hand that's holding the needle, we hold the needle with our thumb and our first two fingers. That leaves our second or our third and our fourth finger, our pinky and our ring finger, free to move around. So you will take that hand that's holding the needle or the loop, grab the cap with your pinky of the tube that you want to open, and use your pinky to pull the cap off. Do all of this within the flame zone so it's still sterile. Then with the cap off, you're going to take the tube and pass the mouth of the tube through the flame 2 to 3 times quickly. You don't want to sit with it in the flame because as that glass heats up, it could crack, and we definitely don't want that. So you just pass it through the flame 2 to 3 times. What you're doing there is actually superheating the air. For lack of a better term, we're going to say superheating. You're heating up the air inside the tube, creating a situation where all of that air inside the tube gets pushed out. So now you're left with only sterile air inside the tube, and you're killing any bacteria that may have been on the mouth of that tube as well. So if you accidentally hit the mouth of the tube with your loop as you're going in, you're not going to collect any more bacteria. So then you take your needle or your loop and you place it into the test tube. You do not want to place the handle into the tube. You only want to place the wire itself into the tube. So that means you may have to bend the broth or whatever your media is so that it goes and meets your particular loop. You don't want to end up hitting the inside because that can contaminate the inside of your test tube. Then you transfer your bacteria that you just collected onto whatever new media, either a plate or a broth or another slant. Then you flame the tube one more time, just in case you put any bacteria on the mouth of it. Then you recap it, and then you flame your loop one last time to get any bacteria that you now have on there killed off. So you flame the loop, open the cap of your tube with your pinky finger of the same hand that's holding the loop, pass the tube through the flame a couple times, collect your sample and transfer it onto the next material, flame the tube, cap it, and then flame your loop. So this is just another way of saying everything that I just did on the previous slide. It's just the word version of that particular image. Now I'm going to show you all of this as a demo before you do the lab. However, let's go over it really quick intellectually, we can say. So with the broth, you're going to collect a small amount of broth in the sterilized loop. And the way you do that is you just put the loop inside the broth. You don't have to scoop, you don't have to shake it around or anything like that. If you touch a broth full of bacteria, your loop will come away filled with that broth. That little circle at the end of your loop actually holds the liquid filled with bacteria. Then you're going to make sure that you do not clang the loop against the tube when you're transferring it into a new broth. Most people want to put the bacteria in and then shake around your loop and bang it against the sides of the inside of the test tube to make sure it all comes off. You don't have to do that. If you move it around just a little bit, trust me, bacteria is coming off. You're going to have thousands, if not millions, of bacteria collected on your loop, even if you just barely touch the bacteria from your original sample. On a slant, you're going to collect a small amount of the bacteria on your loop. Then you gently touch the surface of the agar at the base of the slant, right down here at the bottom. And then you're going to slowly let that loop zigzag as you pull the loop out of the slant. Now, what this will do is create an actual area that looks like a zigzag pattern on the slant where it will grow on the solid media. Some people, what they do instead is they start out at the bottom and they first make a line, dragging the loop all the way out, and then they come back down to the bottom and do the zigzag pattern. The main point is start at the bottom and work your way out. And when you're doing this, you don't have to put any kind of hard pressure. It's all the work of gravity. Just let the loop naturally come to rest on the surface of the auger and then just naturally let it slide back and forth as you pull it out. You don't need to press down. You don't want to dig into the auger or anything like that. Now, a deep is different. You're not going to use a loop at all. For the deeps, you use a needle and you're going to make a stabbing motion. So you're going to collect your bacteria, and then you're going to take your inoculating needle and just stab it straight down into the media as straight as you can, and then pull it out as straight as you can as well. This is a little easier said than done because the media tends to be, it's soft. So as you're trying to pull the needle back out, you might accidentally move it and it creates a pattern or a gouge in the auger as you're pulling out. It's happens, that's completely normal. However, you just want to try to be as straight as possible as you move in and out. Now, the main thing that you have to pay attention to with the deeps is, remember, anything that is not your needle is not going to be sterile. So if the point where the needle meets the handle accidentally touches your auger, kind of like it is in this image right here, you could be contaminating your sample. So you don't usually want to push down too far into the auger. You just want to go about 3/4, maybe 80% of the way up the needle. Today, we are also going to be pouring plates from the media that you created last class. So here we have a really great video made by Dr. Harmon where she shows you exactly how you do that. So you can do your aseptic technique first, or you can do the media first. It's up to you guys. But here, let me show you what we do. So you strike to start the flame. Then within the flame zone, you flame the loop, or the mouth of the flask, and then you pour just enough that it fills about 80 to 90% of your petri dish, and then you stop pouring because it'll end up still spreading out and filling up the whole petri dish. And I like to do it the way Dr. Harmon shows, in a little stack like that as well, because it's just easier than doing it one at a time. You always want to fill the correct side. So there is a cap that goes outside of the bottom dish for the petri dish. Make sure you don't fill the cap. You want the smaller portion on the bottom, the larger portion on the top. So I will once again show you all of this if you have any questions, but that is it for aseptic technique.